Hey, listeners, just letting you know ahead of time that this episode does contain spoilers about many classics. These have all been around for at least 40 years, so, we can't feel too bad if you feel we spoiled the plot for you. But just giving you a heads up, consider yourself warned.
Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to the Prose and Cons podcast, a podcast by writers for writers, because sometimes we feel like cons and many times we feel like prose. Yes, we're allowed to be confident. We have talent and that's okay. I'm Matan Elul, I'm your host for today, and sitting across from me are...
Hello, I'm James Healy. I'm a writer and editor. I'm known for cooling engines.
And across from him?
My name is Alex. I am a writer and I run a guitar school. Most recent thing I published was a short story in the Big Issue Fiction Edition, which was a pretty fun little thing. And of course, I've published a short story collection as well as the Precipice Fiction little anthology that we put together.
Great. And like I said, my name is Matan. I'm also a writer for Precipice Fiction, and sometimes I do some editing. And to pay the rent, I teach English to high schoolers. Today's episode is indisputable classics that you should read to improve your writing. I am going to ask the boys what they have been reading recently, but before we do that, let's make the rules, the parameters of our search clear. As I've sent them to you guys earlier, our definition of classic is probably not any official definition of classic. We just had the very arbitrary number of it has to have been written before 1984, which makes it 40 years old?
Not the book, the date.
Yeah. Yeah, not before the book, but the day, the year. I don't know if that constitutes a classic, but that's what we went for. We kind of wanted those delicious 50s and 60s to be available to us. We're basically going to go one at a time, each saying one novel that we like, particularly because we thought that reading it might improve you as a writer. There are only two rules. You cannot... three rules. 1984 is the cutoff. No same author twice, which I don't know if I told that to you guys. Okay. And no same genre twice. So if you chose Stephen King, which we have all agreed not to bring up today, so should you have chosen Stephen King in complete disobedience to my rules, you're not allowed to pick another horror book unless you...
We need one reference anyway, at least. I'm glad we got it in.
We got the reference out of the way. Yeah. So while our listeners are waiting to hear our incredible picks, Alex, James, what have you been reading recently, or watching, or playing? Anything good?
Yeah, I have been reading New Grub Street, which is a Victorian novel about writers, very meta, and it really blows my mind how many of the problems in that book, because this was written in, I think, 1860. I'm not 100% sure on the date, but I think it's around then. It is amazing how many of the problems and the literary structures and things that they have to deal with are almost one to one. Like, they're not... Like, they're dealing with periodicals and things, and getting a short story published and stuff. But there are like one-to-one parallels between pretty much everything. And it's all about money. Like, the whole book is written about money. Just specifically not having enough as a writer. So still highly relatable. Really recommend that to anyone who's interested in Victorian and or literary fiction.
Victorian money problems. If you're interested.
Yeah.
Nice. Sounds great. James, you got something?
Yeah, I haven't really been reading anything, but I recently sat down and played The Last of Us 2.
Ah.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking about, I wanted to play the game before the new series came out.
Yeah.
I guess I quite enjoyed the gameplay. The storyline, individually, each piece I really enjoyed. But then when we got to the end, I kind of felt like some of the parts didn't make up for a good whole. So I'm interested to see if the TV series, when they do the next season, will they tie that together a little bit better, which I think they could do, or will they take it in a different direction? So I'm confident the TV series will be quite good.
You know, I think I heard in an interview that they're planning to not follow it to a T.
I'd
The
hope so.
second
Yeah,
season.
yeah. I think there was a lot of structural issues. I think, but that was because you play as some different characters, so they kind of have to do, one character's point of view at a time. But in a TV series, you could just throw them all together at the same time. I think that would work a lot better.
Okay, but yeah, I haven't played the second one, but it's been so big in pop culture that it's impossible to not know. Kind of, I just kind of watch the ending on YouTube because I can't hold myself, and I don't have a PlayStation, so I'm never gonna play it. So there you go.
Yeah,
Cool. Myself, I have been going through Aragon, which I'm really liking. It's just that I started university recently, so I do a lot of reading as an assignment. So I didn't really have time to pick up Aragon and kind of plow through it because I'm really enjoying it. It's just I don't think I've read it over the last week, but I have read a lot of poetry for my introduction to poetry class. So there's that. Cool. And speaking of reading, let's jump straight into our topic one at a time, and we're going to do it alphabetically. So I'll go first because I'm the host, but then Alex and then James. I'm not going to throw you into the fire, Alex.
That's not alphabetical.
Would you like it to be?
No. I'm just kidding. I'm just being sour.
All right. So I got 3 books. Just for the listeners that are not familiar with me, James and Alex, when we planned this podcast, I thought to myself, there might be a bit of overlap because we are all fans of a certain genre that I will not name. And I kind of expect at least 2 of us to pull out something from that genre, if not one. So I'll start with something that couldn't be further. I will start with a book that has been published in English roughly 400 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And roughly 2,800 years ago has been published in, well, Greek. And I am talking about none other than the Iliad, written by Homer. And for readers who are not familiar, you probably know this story in a different name. And the Iliad is the tale of the war between the Greeks and the Trojans. Famously depicted in the 2004 movie Troy with Brad Pitt as Achilles the godlike, and I believe Eric Bana as Hector of Troy. I'll just do a really quick summary, not of the movie, but of the actual Iliad. There's a Trojan prince, they go on a diplomatic mission to Greece, and lo and behold, there's a beautiful woman named Helen. There is just one problem. Helen is married to Menelaus, who is, I believe, the brother of a Greek king named Agamemnon. Sorry if the names are a bit difficult, but basically, the Trojan prince sees Helen and says, why the hell not? He kidnaps her or invites her, depends on whose version you believe, and the two frolic away back to Troy. Needless to say, the Greeks are not happy, and so the war begins. Now, why do I think you should read the Iliad? Let's get off the most important thing first. Many people, when they hear about old classics, they kind of cringe and think, oh, I can't read that kind of English. It's old and hard and difficult, and I'm going to suffer, and I'm not going to understand anything. Well, the modern translations are really freaking good. It is not dumbed down, but it is simplified to a way that is very easy to read. So before I try to sell you on it, I actually have the first paragraph and I want to read it to you, just so you see how, maybe not easy, but how readable the translation is. So the first chapter of the Iliad is called The Rage of Achilles. We're going to talk about him in a second. And this is how it begins. Rage goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous, doomed, that cost the Greeks countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighter souls, but made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds. And the wheel of Zeus was moving toward its end. Begin muse when the two first broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. This story, at the end of the day, might be about the War of Troy, but what it's really about is about 2 men doing a pissing contest. And these 2 men are Agamemnon and Achilles. And basically they're playing a game of, I don't need you, you need me. And that's just shows you that over 2,800 years, nothing has changed. It's a book about love, murder, a lot of action. I don't want to offend anyone, but it's almost superhero-esque with how these Greek heroes are described. They can all kill 100 men with their spear. I mean, it's pretty cool. So if you love action and you want to see a book that is basically the foundation of Western literature, you can't go wrong with the Iliad by Homer. That's my
Solid. Yeah.
recommendation.
That was
Nice.
something I remember from reading it, was the kind of blow of the exchanges between the characters. And then when one of them misses a trust, or when they get speared, it like details how they died.
Yeah.
Really good action, yeah.
Yeah, I remember liking the movie. I haven't read it, unfortunately,
Oh,
which I
good.
feel really bad. I don't think I've even read the Odyssey, to be honest. But it's a classic, right? Like I know the story. It's like, yeah, it's your classic war movie, basically, or like a rivalry, essentially. Like
Yeah.
it's just kind of a back and forth written in a classic Greek style. But like, having not read it, I really can't speak to exactly how well it's written. But it's a great story.
Yeah, it's very good. The gods often step in and protect like their preferred
Yeah.
fighters and stuff, which is like
Yeah.
really unfair. It's just kind of like, it's almost like they've written in plot armor for the characters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
at some point, Zeus like says, "No more interfering," and everybody's plot armor is deactivated.
That's really
And
funny.
then like Zeus stops paying attention, and they all sneak it back in. Yeah, it's
That's great.
like, to think that this was written almost 3,000 years ago is insane. Like,
Yeah, it's wild.
it could have been on fanfiction.com. Really, I'm not saying it is I'm not saying it is slander. Okay, I'm just saying that the human writer has not changed. Okay, we love what we love.
That's cool. I want to read that now.
Oh, you should. All right, alphabetically, I believe it's you, Alex.
Okay. Well, the one that I'm going to pick is J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. I read this in school a while ago, and I thought I'd do a little refresher on it because I haven't read it for a really long time, but I remember really liking it, and certain parts of it have definitely stayed with me. I'm going to read a little bit of it first, and then kind of extrapolate on that. So, chapter 1. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. In the first place, that stuff bores me. And in the second place, my parents would have had about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told them anything pretty personal about them. They're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. They're nice and all, I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. Besides, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. I'll just tell you about this madman stuff that happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. And that gives you a pretty good sense of the level of voice that is going through this. I'd say, if nothing else, and it's not nothing else, it's actually quite well written. The character, the voice of the character that comes through here is like one of the real greats. Like the as you can hear, it's in a very colloquial style. It's I believe it was written in the 50s, and if you listen, you can kind of hear that twang to it. It's got this very New York sort of burr to it. And yeah, there's just something about it. The vocabulary isn't super complicated. Like there's a lot of repetition in what he says. He'll be like, I was horsing around. I horse around a lot, like when I'm bored. Like he'll just say that sort of thing over. Like I do this a lot when whatever. Like, but it's this voice that really gives the idea of what it's like to be 16 and to be sort of like hyperactive and not able to like stick to the same thing. But yeah, just very consistent. So this was, I believe it was the only thing J.D. Salinger ever wrote. I could be wrong about that. Certainly was the only significant large piece of literature he ever wrote. And it's just about this boy who basically is kicked out of school, goes to stay at a hotel, and he tries to hire a prostitute and then sort of like gets cold feet and is like, oh, can we just sit around and talk? And she kind of gets mad at him, and it just kind of goes on in this like episodic fashion, in that sort of way. And there's a lot of like just really touching moments, like when he's like right at the end, the whole Catcher in the Rye thing is when he's there and he's watching his brother just on a carousel, and he's just like, oh, I'd like to just be like, I forget exactly how the metaphor goes, but he's like, I'd like to just be able to be like a guardian for children if they ever like run off too far away. I could like catch them and bring them back. And it's quite sentimental. It's also got this really good sense of detail. Let me see if I can just find it quickly.
While you're looking, I gotta say that I've never read The Catcher in the Rye, but that thing oozed with voice, with
Yeah,
like
right.
even before you said voice, I'm like, wow, that feels just like, is that even prose? I feel like that's so good. I'm having a conversation with the guy. It kind of reminds me of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. In that,
Yeah, it's
he,
it's got this very American voice to it, and it's like it's so identified. Like the second you read it, like okay, so I've said this several times. I'm going through like a as a judge for a an award for an Australian fiction sort of blog right now. I'm like
please send bribes to Alex.
I'm not here. I'm not saying exactly which one or what I'm, but you go through and like you have that voice in your mind saying like isn't like all kind of books just the same? Like it's all just
Mm.
words, right? We're all just writing words and like
Yeah.
nope, not the same. Like this stuff is so much better. It
Mm.
like this like the voice and the clarity of intent here is just so much stronger than 99.99% of it. You can tell why something from 1957 has lasted a good almost 70 years. So let me
I'm sold, right?
yeah, it's
That was an
great.
easy
It's
sell.
one of my favorite books for sure. Just so what happens is he goes in and talks to this lecturer who's he's kind of friends with, but like who has failed him essentially and has may or may not have been like the final straw of like what happened. And he's coming in and is the guy's about to dress him down. And just the amount of detail he puts in here. The minute I went in, I was sort of sorry I'd come. He was reading the Atlantic Monthly, and there were pills and medicine all over the face, and everything smelled like Vicks nose drops. It was pretty depressing. I'm not too crazy about sick people anyway. What made it even more depressing, old Spencer had on this very sad, ratty old bathrobe that he was probably born in or something. I don't much like to see old guys in their pajamas and
Oh,
like it
shots
just oozes.
fired.
It
He
just
doesn't.
oozes character.
He
Like
doesn't
he's
hold
just
back.
yeah, it's really funny. Like it's really like a couple of times just listening as I'm walking back, I would just like giggle out loud because it's very, very funny. Um, yeah. Anyway, that's probably enough me waxing lyrical about it. But
That
yeah,
was
just if you're
that was
looking for
excellent.
voice, yeah.
That was really good, Alex. Really good for voice. Like, yeah, if you, especially if listeners, if you're writing a first person story, I mean, don't
Yeah.
copy this, okay? But this could be great to help develop your own voice.
Yeah, I think it was a big influence on me in terms of like, hey, if you're gonna write something, make sure it's got its own thing.
You do have a touch
Like
of that in your writing, that your voice
I
doesn't
think
feel
so.
like a storyteller as much as a person sitting next to you, like, hey, check this out. This just happened, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think I took a lot of that vibe from this book
Oh,
specifically,
Mm.
and thinking back on it. Anyway.
nice. Well, the next letter is J for James.
Yeah. Um, my book would be Crime and Punishment by Theodore Dostoevsky.
Holy shit, really? Let's
Very
go.
good.
1966. Yeah, yeah. Kind of considered maybe the beginning of like psychological thrillers because it's the first story that like really delves into, I guess, someone's mindset and
Yep.
they're changing their kind of inner turmoil and stuff like this. So Crime and Punishment is about a guy who is hard pressed for cash. I can't remember. He's moved to some Russian town, some Russian city. He's not doing so well.
Yep.
And he decides to murder and rob his elderly, she might be his landlord. And he does so. And then the rest of the story is sort of just about his trying to almost just not even get away with it, but just in terms of like just process and deal with what he's done. And the police are kind of looking into it, and I think he was probably witnessed at the scene, so he's called up as a witness, and the police come in and speak with him. And oh man, it is just a masterclass in like very different from kind of modern storytelling where you're kind of trying to rush along through the plot, because the plot is just he's hard pressed, decides to do a murder, tries to get away with it. It just really takes its time to like lay out his mindset prior to it, and then his decision to go and do it. And I remember reading it thinking, almost any other story would just jump straight to the murder and then have it happen quick, and then move on. But it slowly builds and slowly builds and slowly builds. It's just a masterclass of like tension and just putting you there in the room and making you feel, each decision, and him walking up the stairs and him moving from one room to the next. And I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, just a brilliant book. And then for anyone who is interested in, I don't know if people are interested in kind of like the history of certain genres or where like genres and stuff come from. Yeah, it is kind of like the first psychological crime thriller. First, one of the earlier stories from the perspective of someone who commits a crime and then is trying to get away with it. The investigation that follows then is sort of about not really a cat and mouse between him and the cop, but you do get a sense of, is the cop going to get him, or is he going to crack? Is he going to say the wrong thing? Is he going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing in front of people? Because he's kind of, he goes in and out of almost fugue states afterwards because he's so like just such tumultuous inner conflict over what's happened. But yeah, great book, worth checking out.
I think it does something really well in that not that I condone it, but it does really put you in the mind of a murderer, because not from experience, but I'd imagine that you gotta stew on something like that. You gotta boil inside you for a while. You don't just wake up like, okay, that's it, I'm gonna whack that guy. It's like a spiral, and that book really makes you feel, okay, it's called Crime and Punishment, so you expect the guy to commit the crime, but it's at a certain point at the beginning, like, is there gonna be a murder?
Yeah, because he doesn't put you in the mindset of someone who you would say he's going to murder someone. He puts you in the mind
pity
of someone.
him.
Yeah, he's also someone who knows better, and then over the course of the beginning of the story, he like kind of justifies it to himself. In terms of his own need and in terms of like who the person is, and like, oh, she's a bad person, I need this, and I'll spend it on good things because there's people who like his family relies on him and stuff. So it really gets you there, so that you're kind of like, you're almost with him and you're kind of like, I'm kind of rooting for you. And then it's heinous and how it happens. And then afterwards you're just like, you're still kind of like, I hope he gets away, but he shouldn't get away for what he did. It's pretty bad. So yeah, it's excellent. Yeah, I think it's worth reading for everyone.
It's been a while since I read it, but I recall a letter from the sister of the hero. By the way, spoilers, okay? This podcast is going to be chock full of spoilers. But there's a letter from his sister, like depicting what's happening with her life. Like, I think it's 10 pages of her suffering. And I just read it and I'm like, I need a shower, like it was so bad. Just like, she's hungry, she has to do certain things, and then, like, my God, Russia, take care, stay safe. But yeah, definitely a masterpiece, undisputable masterpiece. Cool. And round 2 of our recommendations. Wow, that was a heavy round. We had Iliad, we had Catcher in the Rye, and we had Dostoevsky, which is fun. Okay, my second one is none other than The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, written by 1959. Stories go that Shirley Jackson decided to write the book because she heard about a literal haunted house story, and she kind of thought like, that kind of sound like a bunch of people making it up for their own agenda, and I'm going to write a real story about a haunted house. And here's why I think you should read it, dear listeners. I feel like writing a horror book, telling a horror story is a bit like fishing. It's really about patience and about pulling in the right strength at the right time. And an inexperienced fisherman would think, oh my God, someone bit. I better pull as hard as I can, as fast as I can, so that this fish doesn't lose interest. So I'm going to show them all the monsters on chapter number 4 and reveal the mystery. Now, something that Shirley Jackson does expertly, also in her short story, The Lottery, by the way, but definitely in the whole Haunting Hill House, is she's patient, she's restrained. I think she realizes that with horror, like a haunted house, like a ghost story, the more you leave it close to reality, to a situation in which the reader, thinks of something, I've heard knocks in the night. I've heard inexplicable pebbles striking the window glass. The more you leave it in that realm, where the unnatural is not necessarily staring you at the face and asking you for a sacrifice, the more unsettled your reader is going to become. And the amount of work she does on the characters to make them feel like people with problems. Sometimes you even forget that these people have come to a haunted house to allege whether it is truly haunted or not. So without spoiling, the main character has a fantastic voice, the way she tells the story. The ending is unique and brave, I would say. And it feels like a
yeah.
foundational piece as far as writing good gold standard horror. And I think that horror can produce excellent characters, very good prose, and sometimes it kind of suffers from the stigma that, horror is kind of cheap, it's just like jump scares. Having 10 Saw movies certainly not help that reputation. But if you are interested in writing horror, or if you're just interested in reading horror and hearing that little bump in the night and getting a heart attack, I really recommend The Haunting of Hill House. It's quite short. I'm not gonna read any part of it, but I promise you that as soon as you open the first page, you're gonna see that the prose is special.
I think you really nailed it when you said it's the gold standard of horror, because the hardest thing to do in horror, and as someone who's written horror, I can attest to this, and I'm sure James and yourself will as well. I think the hardest thing, but maybe the most rewarding thing to write in horror, is to ride that line between the real and the unreal. Like to get to that point where
Yeah.
even at the end, you're never really sure if there was a ghost or if it was just all in the character's head. That sounds like an easy thing to do. It is not. It is a very, very challenging to ride that line and be like, I've read a few books that come close. I've read a lot of books that just go, nah, we'll just. It's a big
It's
a
a
big
demon.
scary.
It's a
creature,
demon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's got horns, it's got fangs, like it's coming to kill you. But the way she writes, I think you got it with the characters as well. Like there's the combination of the characters and the supernatural stuff there, and how like reasonable you can make it. Kind of, it might be the platonic ideal of the haunted house story, if not the horror genre. I think it's very, very good.
Yeah, superb. She really doesn't waste any. She uses her characters so well, so economically. There's no extra characters in it, and there's no extra character scenes. The characters are in it the perfect amount to facilitate like a really good horror story. And she derives, like you were saying, so much from like the creak in the window and the rattling on the door and stuff like that. She uses that expertly well in order to kind of keep the horror at a distance, but that it's
Yeah.
still scary, and then to keep things
yeah.
kind of ambiguous. Like it's masterfully ambiguous. I love it. So yeah, excellent call. Love that story.
Also, the Netflix show was not half bad, really. It does veer
No,
from
very
the book,
different.
Yeah,
veer
very
from the book,
different.
but I felt like
Excellent.
spiritually, it got what made the book nice.
It flubbed the ending a little bit, I thought.
Yes,
But
yeah, that was
Yeah.
my bit. Yeah,
A little less subtle is what I wanted to say. Like,
yeah.
All right. The second one I want to pick, and this also was something I read in high school, and I haven't really read since, but it really stayed with me, is The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. The story goes, there was a book, I believe, called Coral Island that was sort of like a Swiss Family Robinson thing about a bunch of kids who get stranded on an island, and they come together and they make this functioning society that's really functional, and it's very like colonial, like, oh, look at how civilized these nice English lads are. And so this was this book, and William Golding, who was a philosophy teacher, was like, nah, I don't think it'd go down like that. So he's done this alternate version of that where these kids get stuck on an island. I'll give you the basics of the plot. There is one boy named Ralph who is kind of the leader, and the kids kind of rally around him because he gets if you've ever heard the phrase "I have the conch," which is actually what we initially called this. This
Yeah.
Conch. What was it? Conch fiction or conch? Anyway,
Conch Huddle.
Conch Huddle. Yeah, I still love that name. Anyway, all the kids kind of rally around him. And basically, there's a few archetypes. There's like the brainy kid who's kind of chunky and has glasses. He's called Piggy. There's another kid who's almost like this Christ-like figure who's Simon, and he kind of gets this Cassandra-esque arc where he sees that like basically he's going to be, they're all going to come to ruin. Then there's this other boy called Jack who is a little bit older, like a bit of a bully. And basically, the whole thing is just these kids. I think they set these 3 rules. It's like have fun, survive, and keep the signal going so that someone who coming past will come and save us. And basically, it very quickly degenerates into politics. Jack kind of amasses a bunch of kids to take them over from Ralph's side. There's this warring sort of thing, and essentially what happens is at the end with I don't want to give you spoilers. Like at the end, there's a lot of catastrophe and a lot of bloodshed. And it kind of gets revealed at the end that it was also set up by the English. I guess that is a spoiler, but whatever. By the English army, because the world is basically on the brink of collapse, and they're like, look, can we just make it good? Will children be fine just if we let them go by themselves? And the takeaway from that is no, probably not. We're probably all gonna kill each other. Yeah, the prose is very. I'll read you a little bit. I'll read you from the beginning. The boy with the fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and has begun to pick his way towards the lagoon. Though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, his grey shirt stuck to him and his hair was plastered to his forehead. It's very serviceable. The prose is good. It's nice, economical, efficient. But it's got that another element that I really like to take from things is like the darker side of man. It kind of does that very well. It threads you through these story beats that essentially just the tension's kept up very strongly. And it's just a really good thriller with a very strong philosophical underpinning. Not necessarily sure that I agree with its resolutions at the end, but it's very well told, very like unsettling. It's almost bordering on horror, science fiction, but it is again very realistic. So it's kind of like almost like a sister piece to Haunting of Hill House in that way, I'd say.
I think that book has suffered from how much education systems worldwide love it. And that like children have that inherent instinct to reject anything brought by their literary teacher, like literature teacher. As a teacher in high school, we do teach Lord of the Flies in the native language, which is Hebrew. We don't do it in English class. And the kids just like, they stay away from it like oil from water, and just because they have to be tested on it. And they watch these abridged YouTube videos that will tell them exactly what happens in the book without reading the book. Which is a shame, because I think it's great. But yeah, sometimes something is elevated so much that people kind of like, oh, it can't be that great. No, it kind of is.
Yeah, and you see like the Simpsons parody and stuff of it. Like I saw that. I think I'd seen that first and hadn't realized it was riffing on it. And no, it is just so. Yeah, there's just something to it. Something like just really chilling about like these are children. These are like 10-year-olds.
I think there's a truth. There's a truth in that that makes some people uncomfortable. Makes me uncomfortable. But yeah.
I was very lucky that I did in fact read it at school, but I remember I read it on the last day of school when they were just like, here's some books, read whatever you want, we don't care. And I took it and I read it in one go. So nice. I kind of dodged that like, do I have to read this? Which I think I was very, very grateful for. I think maybe Great Gatsby might have caught me a little bit with that syndrome though.
Interesting you should say that.
I am a big believer that people are absolute savages if you left them to their own devices. But I have read a book called Humankind, which is kind of a hopeful exploration of humanity. And it does touch on the Lord of the Flies and point out that it's probably something that feeds into our worst fears. And that's possibly why it was successful. But because of its success, it's kind of shaped how we interpret each other. So I do try to always put a little positive spin on maybe we're not as bad as we fear we might be. But I guess
that's true. Yeah. Nice. Thank you, Alex. That was a good one. James, you got something for us?
Yes. So I'm going to jump into sci-fi with something a little bit more modern, and pick Dune by Frank Herbert.
Let's go.
Solid.
Yeah.
50s, right? 1950s, am I right?
60s, 1965.
1960s. Yeah. Under the cutoff.
Yeah, just before. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, a film came out a year or so ago with Timothée Chalamet, and everybody can kind of run and watch that. But I do think for writers, it's worth checking out because it is a great blend of character, plot, theme, and world building. The story, for anyone who isn't familiar with it, takes place, it's kind of like a big space opera, where there's sort of all these different houses, kind of like Game of Thrones, and each of them rule different planets. So what's happened is the space emperor has decided this family is out and this other family is in charge of Dune. And Dune is a place where they produce something called spice, and spice is kind of like the magic dust of this space
The MacGuffin.
colony universe. It's the MacGuffin. Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes everything work. It makes the space travel work. I think it's used as currency. It's also a drug. It also grants vaguely magical powers in
A
terms of
super
telepathy.
MacGuffin.
Yeah. So it follows the family, the father and the son and the mother that land on this planet to kind of take over. The locals are not necessarily cool with them being there, and the planet is entirely sand, and it's got all this different inner workings. Your man who wrote it was actually, I think he was an ecologist. He studied sand and he knew how deserts worked and all this, so he made a perfectly functioning planet. And then there's a whole betrayal between them and the other family that got kicked out and stuff. Absolutely great, dramatic, just big dramatic space opera, and tons of action, tons of different characters in it, and their different alliances and their different the different groups and their different belief systems. So he really, like, everything is switched up to 10. The characters, the world building, the themes, and he does everything so well, and everything works really well together. So I just think it's a great book for anyone liking to write fantasy or science fiction or things based in other worlds. It's also kind of considered to be the inspiration for both Star Wars and the Game of Thrones series. So it's very,
Really?
yeah. So if you liked either of those, you'll find a lot of a lot of that in Dune. Yeah, and it's had quite a big impact culturally, I think.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's like, imagine both of those stories put together. That's Dune. So yeah, there's a lot in there. He also does certain things really well, which I've seen. The things that I don't like I really don't like when characters can see the future, because I think it serves as a little bit of a get out of jail free card for making them make the right decisions, and takes away a lot of drama and tension. But he uses that mechanism really well, I think, actually throughout the series of Dune books, but definitely in the first one, where he presents the character as the thing that he can see in the future is the thing that he doesn't want, and he's almost trying to step off the path. But the various points for it to kick in is kind of like when he has a big decision to make, and it kind of works. It actually adds so much more to each of the scenes, particularly the action scenes, where he feels it really builds up like that the protagonist has died many times. So this isn't just a fight that the protagonist is in that he's obviously going to win because he's the protagonist. This is, you've died here many times. This is a death moment for you that you may not get through.
It's like a video game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like 100% like a video game. That was something I loved, is actually in The Last of Us, was you always have a sense that you've just barely survived because you've probably played through the section 20 times and been wrecked. So that one time that you do pass it, you just get this really strong sense that the characters just do, like, oh, I know I just got by the skin of my teeth because I've died there so many times. So yeah, great book. Dune. Definitely check that one out.
I definitely agree that it's kind of the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi, but the sci-fi is actually more diverse than fantasy. Like, fantasy is a bit more streamlined, that you can, I feel like the branches are a bit closer to the trunk in fantasy, that you can see like, oh, these books are really influenced by Lord of the Rings. Whereas sci-fi has, and you guys would attest to that, you read more sci-fi than me, that sci-fi does have more diversity. Than it's not all space opera, but a lot of it that is space opera is like directly derived. I don't think there is Star Wars without Dune. I don't think there is Star Trek without Dune. I don't think it really, maybe it didn't start, I mean, Asimov and stuff like that did happen, I think, before, but it didn't start our thirst for galactic adventures, but it did capitalize on it big time. And kind of ashamed that let's see if the third movie kind of, delivers, and the second and third.
Did the second one come out already?
Did they say 3 parts?
I don't know. I didn't.
I think it's 3.
It's a trilogy.
No, I don't think the second one's out yet. No,
the second hasn't come out. But let's see if it, kind of revives the genre, because I kind of feel like space opera has taken a back seat. But yeah,
the first one was great.
Yeah,
the first one was very. I went into it because my girlfriend Liz had seen it, and she was like, it was Timothy Chalamet, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, I kind of, I don't know, I want to see it. So we saw it, and I was very impressed. I mean, look, his performance is good. I like that, but as just the scene with the sand ship where it's like time crunch before the like big sandworm
Yeah.
gets it. That was so good.
Oh,
Anytime there's a big desert and a big ship about to be eaten by a big worm, I am all
Yeah.
in. That is 100% my.
You know,
Yeah, I just thought that was great.
You say every time, but that probably only
Yeah, I
happened
know.
twice. So
Yeah,
it's still weird.
It might be an n=1 moment, but still, I was in.
I swear, every single time that a huge worm, listens to the whims of a teenager. Anyway,
You'll
tell
better believe I'm there.
I'll tell a quick story. I
Yeah.
might have told a story before on the podcast. I'm not sure, but when I was a kid, when I would go to the local bookstore in my town, there was the kids section, and then there was like probably the kids science fiction section and horror, and then there was kind of like the adult section. Well, I would be looking through, and I'd get the end of the kids section, and I'd stop. And sitting on the shelf in the adult science fiction section was what was evidently Dune, was just a picture of sand and a little person kind of standing in the foreground, and this huge big worm coming up out of the sand in the background. I had no idea what this was, but to me, I was like, nah,
I'm
that
not
looked
ready.
too weird. That's clearly adult science fiction. How is he going to fight that worm? No, thanks. Whatever that is.
I imagine the
That's
scene
so
from The
funny.
Lion King where he tells him, "You see the land in the shadow. Do never go there."
Yeah, that was it.
That's the sci-fi section.
That's
Yeah.
the adult,
that is forbidden
speculative fiction.
territory. And then probably 20 years later, I'm reading Dune, and they're talking about these sandworms, and I just had a memory of that book, and I was like, "That's hardly it, is it?" And then they get to that section where the ship is above the thing, and I was like, "Oh my god, I've arrived! I'm an adult.
Yes.
I'm reading the forbidden
Yeah.
adult science fiction."
That's
That's
so
amazing.
good. That's so
Um,
good.
Let's do like a semi lightning round for the last three. So we get them out of the way. I do want all of us to get to our third book. Wow, some really good recommendations. I feel like some foundational pieces have been mentioned. All right. Okay, I did not have to use my backup. I will use my original third, which is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez,
Okay.
published in 1967. It is, how do I start? It is like maybe the most famous Latin book, at least to me. In the eyes of many, it has elevated the reputation of South American literature, perhaps unjustifiably, because the books have been amazing, just maybe the rest of the world hasn't caught up. But still, when people think about South American literature, and specifically about a term called magical realism, Colombia and the Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez come to mind, specifically the book 100 Years of Solitude. And you can find probably dozens of essays on why you should read it, and you should. So I'm going to give you like a really quick summary of what it is about. It is the story of 7 generations of the Buendia family and how they settle in the fictional town of Macondo, which is situated in the real country of Colombia. So the town itself is completely fictional. I think Colombia is mentioned by name, and if it isn't, it is heavily implied that it is Colombia. And basically, sometimes we get the advice of, give your characters a big hat or an eye patch or a wooden leg so they're easy to distinguish. Well, 100 Years of Solitude gives half the characters the same names, and fuck you, because they're all called Aureliano Buendia or Arcadio Jose Buendia, and if you can't tell the difference, you're not paying attention. And you know what? You can tell the difference. You can tell the difference. So if you want to know how to characterize characters without the crutches of an eye patch or red hair,
name.
or names, who need names? Just know them by their behavior. And seriously, it's the story of a family and the problems of a family. But the reason I'm recommending it here in the Precipice Fiction podcast, which is, let's be honest, it is for speculative fiction writers mostly. And the reason I recommend 100 Years of Solitude is how it handles magical realism and magic in general. Imagine if someone told you a story with a straight face about how they went to the bank one day and they forgot their credit card, so they had to call their wife to bring it over. And on the way, she met a goblin and she had to argue with the goblin about the parking spot. That's how the story is told, with a straight face, the same tone, and the unnatural elements are so well blended into the story that you almost double back and like, did I just read that the entire city hasn't gone to sleep for 3 months? Yes, that's the kind of stuff that he writes in 100 Years of Solitude, and he presents it as the undisputable reality of the world he created. And in other ways, the world is so similar that some of the things taking place are almost maddening, especially the bad ones. A massacre is committed and no one talks about it. No one remembers it. And doesn't that feel eerily similar to our world? And just the way the prose handles magic with such maturity. And especially if you write in an urban fantasy where you are trying to convince your reader that magic has always been there and it's part of life and they use it to make their tea, then that's a great place to learn how to treat magic as if it really is part of the world and not just a cool gimmick. And yeah, if you're a speculative fiction writer, and if you aren't, I highly recommend 100 Years of Solitude.
It's kind of like making the book not about the magic. It's like making the magic just part of the book, you know? It's there's one, like Harry Potter is a book about a wizard, and which is inherently about magic. But 100 Years of Solitude is about a family, and the family happens to be magical, right? I think that's the difference.
Yep. And that's the catch for me.
Nice. Okay.
All right. My last pick is the classic novella by Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. So if you haven't read this, I recommend you read it. But if you haven't read this, you almost have certainly seen the movie Apocalypse Now, which is a pretty close adaptation of it. And we talked a little bit about that a couple of podcasts ago. So check out our thing about good or bad adaptations. But very simply, what it's about is a man who gets hired as the captain of a steamboat, a river steamboat, and he makes his way literally into the heart of Africa, which at the time it describes at the beginning like the character was always fascinated by the idea of the blank spaces on the map, spaces that hadn't been filled in, because this was again the 1800s and not all the parts had been filled in. Like there was still some pretty significant lacunae on the in the maps, like gaps where no one had filled that stuff in. Basically, this guy goes on and he's essentially working for what you can interpret as the East India Trading Company. Like that's pretty much what you can the nearest parallel. And what happens is he goes from just part to part, and just sort of following on from my last book, just depicts the increasing kind of depravity or morbidity. Like he sees these slaves chained up, and they're all like they're really skinny. They're literally like clinking in time. It's a chain gang essentially, and he keeps moving further and further into this country that is like completely unknown, and the people get a little bit wilder and a little bit crazier. And he keeps hearing about this guy called Kurtz, and Kurtz is essentially the symbol for kind of the heart of darkness, if you will. It's this man who's been so consumed by just the strictures and things around him kind of collapsing and fraying that he's basically gone completely insane. And you get a sense that like if there's one sort of word that I would want to put on it, it's this sense of atmosphere, of place as character. Like talked a lot about character in Catcher in the Rye, but this is one of those things that really gives you a sense of the environment being its own sort of thing, and the effect that has on people actively as he goes through it. And he meets Kurtz eventually, and the man is just stark raving mad. And eventually the guy dies, and he has to take the guy's papers back to his wife, and she's like, "Oh, what did he? What was he like?" And he's like, "His last words were of you," and they very much weren't. So it's just this, like him having to come back and like be almost shell shocked into being like, "Well, I guess I gotta like put some veneer of civility onto this, so that like this woman isn't gonna like just realize her husband went completely mad." And it's just this really haunting, sort of sad conclusion to a generally very haunting and sad book. Yeah, so that's what I'd say.
What a
Yeah,
lineup, Alex.
Superb book. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Lord of the Flies, Catcher in the Rye, and A Heart of Darkness.
Tried to go for gold.
What a trifecta. Yeah. No, good job.
Yeah.
Nice. James?
I'm gonna pick The Call of the Wild by Jack London, written in
Ah,
1993.
Nice.
Story of a dog that belongs to like a well-to-do family, so it's a very well-kept kind of. I think it was like a big husky type dog, big German Shepherd type thing, which gets dog napped and taken up to the edge of explored Canada, and gets kind of put onto a dog sleigh team, and they go riding out into the great unknown. Wonderful, wonderful book. Quite harrowing in places, but really wonderful. Wonderfully written, beautifully written, and then just kind of a really great story. And I mention it because it's entirely from the perspective of a dog who doesn't have any dialogue, or I think he doesn't have any coherent thoughts because he's a dog. But everything around him is described, and he observes everything. And it's just a fantastic example of, I guess, a slightly different way of writing a character. And you get to know the other dogs, the dog say team, their different personalities and stuff, even though, again, none of them have any dialogue, none of them have anything to differentiate them. A real joy to read, beautifully written. So yeah, I'd highly recommend it.
I'm happy you brought it up because one of my favorite books that I've read as a kid was also by Jack London, White Fang.
White Fang. I was almost going to say it because the opening of White Fang is some of the best. Oh, it's fucking amazing. Just beautifully written. Yeah, yeah. Talking about the cold, and he's saying how the cold likes to. The cold wants everything to be still. Just wants the water to be still. It wants the trees to be still. So it's everything to stop. And then dog sleigh team and the people come running through, and the cold is just like, no, none of that is happening. I just want like life is animation, but the cold is stillness, and it's about this conflict between the two. And then that whole section with the wolves. Oh god,
it's incredible.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
I really like it. It's one of these books. It's like supposedly it's the story of a wolf, but it's really the story of like life, nature. You know, how we. And there's a line I tried to find it real quick. I'm not going to quote it because I don't remember the exact paraphrasing, the phrasing of the line. But it goes something like this: there is no greater pleasure than to be what nature had made you to be. And it's told in the context of a wolf's successful hunt. And like you were made to be this hunter, and to be what you were made to be is like that's the apex of the living experience. Like this is your destiny. And I feel like us as humans, when we pick a job, when we pick a career, to wake up in the morning and feel like I am doing what I am best suited to be, it's very satisfying, especially if you love it. Like,
and there's a lot of that in the Call of the Wild as well. It's almost this class thing because, like you said, James, the dog comes from a well-to-do family, and he's kind of soft, but also like very quickly becomes like, no, I'm a badass, and just like really, really like steps up into this role of like a lot of the other dogs die, like because he gets I believe kidnapped, and then like he's made to be a sled team, and then they go to like different places and things, and like dogs will die and get replaced.
Yeah, it's quite grueling. Like they aren't treated particularly well. Yeah. But when they're talking about how the dogs function on the sled team, it's all about everyone gets into their role and the teamwork and stuff. And it's really, really good. But it's also about, obviously, it's a dog, but it's about people and how everyone works together. That drive to push. Yeah, really, really good.
Good recommendation, James. Yeah. All right, wow, you guys knocked it out of the park. I'm so glad I told you guys not to tell me your recommendations beforehand because I really enjoyed.
I was kind of worried, but
no, what's the worst that can happen? Alex, I believe you have a quote for us regarding literature.
I do have a quote for you, Matan.
Thank you.
That quote is as follows: "When you reread a classic, you do not see more in the book than you did before. You see more in you than there was before," by Cliff Fadiman. That's a good little pearl for everyone to go back and reread some of those books. I know I want to reread some of the books that I brought up, and ones you brought up too.
I was actually just gifted the Call of the Wild, so that's
that's nice.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's a great one. I read that quite recently, actually. Yeah. Oh, you'll love it, man. You'll love it. It's great. It's very short too. Very, very short.
Okay, let's knock it out. Guys, I really had a lot of fun. So listeners, my message to you is this: don't shy away from the classics, especially if you have had a bad experience, with your literature teacher forcing you to read Lord of the Flies. Give them a try. Read the foundation. And if after 10 pages you have decided it's not for you, that's okay. Get it as an e-copy if you're afraid to put money into it. A lot of good books are in the public domain and are available for free.
Free.
But read the, meet your ancestors, all right? So this has been us, Precipice Fiction. I'd like to remind you guys that if you had a good time listening to the podcast, a review on any of the platforms would be super duper appreciated. Really helps us. Viewership has been going up quite a lot recently. We're very happy to see that. The more the merrier. If there are books that you recommend, put them in the comments, email us, send a pigeon, whatever you want. And as always, this is a good spot to plug in our beautiful, delightful anthology of stories, which we have written together. It is called The New Mythic, and it is available on Amazon and is soon to be coming as an audiobook, which we have been tirelessly working on for the past year, I want to say.
Yeah.
No spoiler, but some exciting news to come on that front in the not too distant future. And that's it. Alex, James, always a pleasure, really. And thank you for jumping on.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thanks, man. This was great.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.